Captain Callum Thorne had always believed the past was best left behind. He had earned his rest after years of war, battles that had scared both his body and his soul. Now, on the isolated mining colony of Hesperia 9, surrounded by jagged cliffs and endless dust storms, he thought he could finally escape the chaos of the universe. The quiet, dull hum of the colony's machinery and the routine of his daily life seemed like a safe cocoon, far removed from the conflict he'd once faced. He kept to himself, his old military jacket now worn, the patches faded with time. The scars on his face, reminders of brutal battles, had long ago lost their sting. He'd buried his memories deep, choosing to live simply among the miners who barely knew who he really was. But as he sat in the dimly lit corner of his small quarters one evening, sipping on his cold drink, a sudden interruption rattled him out of his peace. A harsh, distorted signal crackled through the communications panel in his room. His hands froze mid-motion, the familiar voice echoing in his mind. It was a voice he hadn't heard in years, a voice he had once promised to protect. Callum Thorne. The static subsided, and for a brief moment, the voice was clearer, but the words were broken and desperate. He leaned closer, his pulse quickening as recognition dawned. Zia, the alien girl he had saved all those years ago, the orphaned child of a destroyed planet, left alone to fend for herself in a war-torn galaxy. Zia, now a young woman, had been lost to him when he last saw her, after a fateful rescue mission that left her stranded on a distant world. Callum had promised to return for her, but duty had always called him away, and he had failed to keep that promise. The signal cut off, leaving only a cold silence in the air. Callum stared at the screen, his mind racing. He hadn't heard from her since that night on the outskirts of the Charon Nebula, and now, out of nowhere, she was reaching out again. Had she survived? Was she in danger? His heart, hardened by years of war, beat a little faster as he felt a pang of regret. For years, he had buried the memory of Zia, telling himself that it was for the best. She had her own people, her own destiny. He had his own battles to fight. But now, with that single transmission, everything had changed. The promise he made to her long ago, to protect her, came rushing back. He couldn't ignore it, not when she was asking for his help. Callum stood up abruptly, pacing his small quarters. His ship, the Cerberus, was still docked at the spaceport, ready for travel. It had been too long since he had set foot in space, but now, the familiar pull of adventure and duty stirred in him once again. His mind flashed back to the girl he had once saved, her wide, innocent eyes staring up at him, full of gratitude. She had been so fragile, so vulnerable back then. But now, as the distress call suggested, Zia was no longer that helpless child. She had grown, changed, and become someone he barely recognized. A flicker of doubt crossed his mind. What kind of danger could she be in now? What kind of person had she become? And why was she calling on him, of all people, to help? Callum didn't have the answers, but one thing was clear. He couldn't stay here. Not now. Not when she needed him. With a deep breath, he turned to the ship's control panel. The hum of the Cerberus starting up was like a call to arms. He was about to step back into the unknown, and this time, there would be no turning away. Callum's ship, the Cerberus, soared through the vast expanse of space, the stars outside flickering like distant beacons. He couldn't shake the feeling that everything he knew was about to change. The journey had been long, and the silence in the cockpit was almost oppressive as he set course for Verus Prime, the planet where Zia had been raised after the war. The distress signal had been sent from this war-torn world, now in the grip of new conflicts. Callum had only a vague understanding of what had happened to Zia after he left her behind. The memories were blurry, faded by time and distance. She had been so young, just a frightened girl trying to survive. But now, as the distress signal hinted, she was different. He wasn't sure what to expect, and that uncertainty gnawed at him. His hands gripped the controls as he guided the ship into the orbit of Verus Prime. It was a planet unlike any he'd ever seen, its surface a patchwork of jungle and ruins, scarred by centuries of war. The once thriving civilization had been reduced to a shadow of its former self, but amidst the destruction, Callum could still sense hope. A faint glow from the planet's surface caught his eye as he descended into the atmosphere. It was a beacon, a symbol of something more, something worth fighting for. The Cerberus landed with a soft thud on the cracked, uneven ground. Callum paused for a moment before standing up. He could hear the echoes of distant explosions in the background, the ongoing conflict between the remaining factions of Varus Prime. He stepped off the ship, his boots crunching against the dusty ground, and took a deep breath. The air was thick with the scent of burnt metal and ozone. It wasn't the peaceful welcome he had hoped for, but he knew he couldn't turn back now. As he made his way to the coordinates Zia had sent, a figure emerged from the shadows. Callum froze. He had expected a reunion of sorts, but nothing could have prepared him for this. Zia was standing before him, taller than he remembered, her eyes fierce with determination. She was no longer the fragile child he had once cradled in his arms. She had transformed into a warrior. Her long hair, now streaked with silver, framed her sharp features, and the scars of battle marked her skin, a testament to the hardships she had endured. The young girl he had saved was gone, replaced by a powerful, confident woman. Zia's gaze locked with his, and for a moment, neither spoke. The years between them seemed to vanish, but the weight of those years hung in the air. She stepped forward, her voice low but steady. "You came," she said, the words carrying a mixture of surprise and gratitude. "I wasn't sure you would." Callum's heart clenched. He had always wondered if he had failed her, leaving her behind to face the galaxy's dangers alone. But here she was, alive, strong, and commanding her own destiny. His throat tightened, and all he could manage was a nod. "I couldn't ignore your call," he replied, his voice gruff. "But you've changed, Zia. I never imagined." She smiled, but it was a smile of someone who had seen too much, someone who had fought for survival every day. "I had to change. The universe doesn't let you stay the same." Callum could see the leader in her now, the strength and resolve in her eyes. She was no longer the helpless child he had once protected, but a force to be reckoned with. Zia had grown into someone remarkable, and it filled him with a strange mixture of pride and sorrow. He had missed so much of her life, and now, standing before him, she was both a stranger and the girl he had once promised to protect. "I need your help, Callum," Zia said, her voice serious, her eyes never leaving his. "My people, they're on the brink of destruction, and I can't fight this war alone." Callum looked around, sensing the urgency in her tone. He could hear the faint sounds of battle in the distance, a constant reminder of the stakes. His mind raced, but there was no time for hesitation. This wasn't just about Zia anymore. It was about something bigger, something he couldn't ignore. The past had led him here, and there was no turning back. He nodded again, this time with conviction. "I'm with you," he said. "Let's finish this together." As Callum and Zia moved deeper into the heart of Varus Prime, the truth of the planet's suffering became clearer. The jungle they walked through, thick with alien trees and vines, was alive with the sounds of distant skirmishes. The planet's beauty was undeniable, but it was marred by the scars of countless battles. Zia led Callum through narrow paths, her sharp eyes scanning the surroundings for any sign of danger. She had become a master of survival, her movements swift and quiet, a stark contrast to the uncertain, clumsy man who had once tried to protect her. "Tell me what's really going on here," Callum asked, his voice low, as they trekked through the dense underbrush. Zia's eyes hardened as she glanced back at him. "The Varkas. They're an ancient race, more dangerous than anything we faced before. They've been in the shadows for centuries, manipulating the weaker civilizations of the galaxy. They feed on fear, controlling entire populations through fear and mind manipulation." Callum furrowed his brow. "And they're here?" Zia nodded. "They've infiltrated nearly every faction on this planet. My people, the Varisians, are caught in the middle. The Varkas want to wipe us out, but they're using us as pawns in their larger game. They have a weapon, something more dangerous than anything we've ever seen, and they're getting closer to using it. Callum's grip tightened around the blaster holstered at his side. His experience in war had taught him to recognize the signs of a looming threat. He had fought against invaders before, but nothing like this. The Varkas were different. Their mind games, their ability to control and manipulate others from afar, made them more terrifying than any army Callum had ever faced. Zaya led him into a hidden cave, its entrance cleverly concealed behind a waterfall. Inside, they were met by a group of resistance fighters. They were a mix of humans, aliens, and Varisians, all united under a single goal: to stop the Varkas. Among them was Dr. Lyra, a brilliant scientist who had once worked for the Varkas before escaping their control. Her eyes were sharp and calculating, her hands steady as she worked on various devices. Zarek, a tall and rugged fighter with a past full of secrets, stood near the back, his arms crossed. He had a quiet intensity, and though he was clearly loyal to Zia, there was something in his eyes that made Callum uneasy. Dr. Lyra spoke first. "We've been monitoring the Varkas for months. They're building something powerful. We've had reports of a massive structure being constructed in the central city. We believe it's a weapon, but we don't know exactly what it does." Zia's face darkened. "We need to destroy it. It's our only chance." Callum, taking in the seriousness of the situation, nodded. "So we go in and blow it up. Simple enough." But Zia's expression remained grim. "It's not that simple. The Varkas are smarter than we give them credit for. They have an army of loyal followers. Some are mind-controlled. Some are true believers. We can't just charge in blindly. We need a plan." Zarek, who had remained silent up until now, stepped forward. "I know the city. I've spent time there before, for reasons I'd rather not discuss. I can get us inside, but once we're in, it'll be a different story." Callum studied him carefully, weighing the man's words. He wasn't sure he trusted Zarek entirely, but in a world full of enemies, a few shady allies might be necessary. Zaya glanced at Callum, her expression unreadable. "We don't have much time. If we don't act fast, the Varkas will launch their weapon, and nothing on this planet will survive." Callum, feeling the weight of their mission pressing down on him, clenched his fists. Zia had changed, and so had the world around them. This was no longer just about saving her. It was about saving everything she had fought for. He had seen the cost of war too many times, but now, standing by Zia's side, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. "Then let's move," Callum said, his voice steady. "We fight together, or not at all." The small group gathered their gear, preparing for the dangerous mission ahead. With each passing moment, the stakes grew higher. But for Callum, there was no turning back. He wasn't just fighting for a planet or a cause. He was fighting for Zia, the girl he had once saved. Now a woman who had grown into a leader, determined to protect the future of her people. The future of the galaxy rested on their shoulders. The night was thick with tension as Callum and Zia, along with their small band of resistance fighters, moved swiftly through the dense jungle toward the city's outskirts. Their mission was clear: reach the central Varkas stronghold and destroy the weapon before it could be activated. But as the group approached the city, the stakes grew higher and the challenges more dangerous. The dense trees gave way to broken streets and abandoned buildings, remnants of the once great metropolis that had fallen under Varkas control. Zarek, who had been mostly silent during the journey, took the lead. His eyes were sharp, scanning the surroundings for any signs of danger. The others followed close behind, their footsteps muffled by the dirt and rubble beneath them. Callum noticed how Zia moved with the same quiet determination, her focus unwavering. He had seen her strength in action already, but there was something about her now that made her even more formidable. She was no longer the scared girl he had once saved. She was a leader, a warrior who commanded respect. The group finally reached the edge of the city, where they paused to gather their bearings. Zarek crouched down, motioning for the others to join him. He pointed to a large, crumbling building in the distance. "That's the Varkas facility," he whispered. "It's heavily guarded, but I know a way in. We'll have to move fast." Dr. Lyra, the scientist, stepped forward, adjusting the equipment slung across her shoulder. Her face was serious, but there was an undercurrent of excitement in her eyes. "I've been working on a device that could disable their security systems. It should give us a window of opportunity, but it won't last long." Zia nodded, her jaw set with determination. "Good. Let's make it count." Callum studied the group around him. Each one of them had their own reason for fighting, their own personal stake in the battle. Zia, of course, was fighting for the survival of her people. Zarek, with his hidden past, had something to prove. Dr. Lyra, who had once been a part of the Varkas experiments, had an unyielding desire for revenge. They were all broken in their own way, but together they had the potential to bring down the Varkas once and for all. The group set off again, moving through the darkened streets with caution. The city, once a hub of culture and technology, was now a ghost town, its buildings reduced to rubble and dust. The eerie silence was only broken by the distant sounds of Varkas patrols, searching for any signs of rebellion. Callum's hand rested on the grip of his blaster, his senses alert to every sound, every movement. As they approached the Varkas facility, they encountered their first real challenge. A group of Varkas soldiers stood guard at the entrance, their eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of intrusion. Zarek motioned for the group to stop, his eyes narrowing as he studied the soldiers. "We'll have to take them out quietly," he muttered. "I can get past them, but the rest of you will need to follow my lead." Zia nodded, her voice calm but firm. "We don't have time to waste. We take them down fast." With a series of silent hand signals, Zarek moved into position, his body blending into the shadows. Callum watched, impressed by the assassin's skills. Zia followed closely behind, her every movement calculated, each step precise. Dr. Lyra remained near the back, clutching her equipment tightly. In a matter of seconds, the soldiers were down, swift, efficient, and silent. It was over before they had a chance to react, and the group moved forward without a sound. Inside the facility, the true scale of the Varkas operation became clear. The walls were lined with advanced technology, strange symbols glowing faintly on the surfaces. Callum felt a chill crawl up his spine. This wasn't just a weapons facility. It was a place of horrors. He could see the remnants of experiments, the twisted machinery that had been used to control the minds of the Varkas victims. His stomach churned, but he pushed the feeling aside. There was no time for hesitation. "Stay close," Zia ordered, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. "We're almost there." They moved deeper into the facility, and Callum couldn't help but feel the weight of their mission pressing down on them. But with Zia leading them, and the unlikely allies around him, he felt a spark of hope. Together, they might just have a chance at ending this war. But the real question was, would they survive long enough to make it happen? The deeper Callum and the team ventured into the heart of the Varkas facility, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The walls were smooth and metallic, covered in strange symbols and markings that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. The air smelled sterile, almost artificial, and every corner they turned was darker and colder. The feeling of unease settled in Callum's gut like a weight he couldn't shake off. He had been in enemy territory countless times, but this place felt different. It felt like they were walking into the belly of a beast. As they navigated the maze of corridors, Zia led them with the quiet confidence of someone who had been here before. Callum admired her focus, her every step purposeful. She moved like she belonged here, like she was used to the darkness that surrounded them. Despite everything, Zia had become someone formidable, and he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride for the woman she had become. Ahead of them, Dr. Lyra tinkered with a small device in her hands, her face lit by the faint glow of the screens on her wrist. "This should do the trick," she muttered, half to herself, as she attached the device to the security panel. A soft beep followed, and the doors ahead slid open with a quiet hiss. "Nice work, Lyra," Zarek said, his voice cold and practical, as he checked his weapon. His eyes never stopped moving, always alert, always watching. "Don't get too comfortable," Zia warned as they moved through the now open doors. "We're close." The hallway beyond was vast, the ceiling towering overhead, lined with strange, mechanical structures and a web of cables running along the walls. The sound of distant machinery humming was constant, like the heartbeat of the facility. At the end of the hall stood a massive set of reinforced doors, clearly designed to be impenetrable. Callum's heart raced. This was it, the core of the Varkas operation. The weapon they had come to destroy was just beyond those doors. "Ready?" Zia asked, turning to face the group. Her eyes, though filled with determination, betrayed the tension she was trying to hide. She knew the danger they were about to face, but she couldn't afford to show fear. Not now. Callum gave her a firm nod. "Let's do this." Zarek stepped forward first, his movements precise, as if he had done this 1,000 times. He pressed a series of buttons on the control panel beside the door, and a low hum echoed in the room as the massive doors began to slowly open. As they slid apart, the sight that greeted them was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. Inside the chamber, a colossal machine loomed in the center, its intricate design a mix of organic and mechanical components. It was unlike anything Callum had ever seen, part bioengineering, part weaponry. He could feel the power emanating from it, the energy that seemed to crackle in the air. This was what the Varkas had been working toward, a weapon that could change the fate of entire civilizations. But as they stepped inside, a chilling realization hit Callum. The Varkas weren't the only ones who had been waiting for this moment. The door behind them slammed shut with an ear-splitting noise, and from the shadows of the room, figures began to emerge. Tall, shadowy figures with glowing eyes. Varkas soldiers. But they weren't just soldiers. They were different. They were enhanced. Zia's grip tightened around her weapon, her eyes narrowing as she assessed the threat. "They've been experimenting on their own people," she said, her voice tight with disgust. "These aren't just soldiers. These are their failed experiments." Callum's heart pounded in his chest. The soldiers were faster, stronger, and more deadly than any ordinary enemy. They moved with inhuman precision, and the strange glow in their eyes only added to the nightmare they had become. "Stay sharp," Zia commanded, as the first of the enhanced soldiers lunged forward. A fierce battle erupted in the chamber. Callum fired his blaster, his shots hitting their targets with deadly accuracy. Zia was a whirlwind of movement, her combat training kicking in as she struck with lethal force. Zarek and Dr. Lyra fought beside them, each one holding their ground as the enhanced soldiers swarmed in. Callum's mind raced as he fought, his body moving on instinct. He had fought countless battles in his life, but this was different. These weren't just soldiers to be killed. These were people who had been twisted, turned into monsters by the Varkas' dark experiments. It was clear now more than ever that they weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting for the soul of the galaxy itself. With every strike, Callum could feel the weight of the mission press down harder on him. Zia needed him. The galaxy needed them, and there was no turning back. The battle raged on in the heart of the Varkas facility. Callum's pulse raced as he fought side by side with Zia, Zarek, and Dr. Lyra against the enhanced Varkas soldiers. The air was thick with the sounds of gunfire, the whirring of energy weapons, and the eerie growl of the mutated enemies. Each soldier they brought down was replaced by another, and it quickly became clear that the Varkas would stop at nothing to protect their weapon. Zia moved with a deadly grace, her every movement calculated and precise. She was a blur of motion, striking with swift efficiency as she disabled one enemy after another. Callum couldn't help but marvel at how far she had come. The scared, orphaned girl he had once saved had transformed into a warrior, someone who had seen the horrors of war but had never let it break her. She was leading them now, her determination as sharp as any weapon. Zarek, ever the silent fighter, worked in perfect harmony with Zia, his quick strikes and deadly aim eliminating anyone who dared to come too close. Dr. Lyra, though not as physically imposing, was no less important. Her quick thinking and knowledge of the facility's technology gave them the edge they needed. She hacked into the facility systems, disabling security doors and disrupting the Varkas communication, buying them precious seconds to regroup. But the longer they'd fought, the more Callum realized that the odds were stacked against them. The Varkas soldiers didn't tire, didn't hesitate. They were relentless, their strength and speed unnatural. And the closer they got to the weapon, the more dangerous the situation became. Callum's blaster clicked empty, and he quickly switched to his backup, his hands moving with practiced speed. His mind raced as he analyzed their situation. They couldn't keep this up forever. The Varkas were too numerous, and the weapon they had come to destroy was still too far out of reach. Zia. Callum called over the chaos, his voice urgent. We need to move forward. The weapon's just ahead. If we don't stop it now, everything we've done will be for nothing. Zia's eyes locked onto his, filled with both determination and fear. She knew what was at stake. We can't just charge in blindly. We need to thin out their numbers first. But as if on cue, a loud, mechanical sound echoed through the room. The ground shook beneath their feet as the massive weapon in the center of the chamber powered up. The humming noise grew louder, and a strange blue energy began to swirl around the core of the machine. Callum's stomach twisted with dread. The weapon was activating faster than they had anticipated. We don't have time, Callum shouted, feeling the weight of their situation crashing down on him. We have to get to that thing, now. Without waiting for a response, Callum sprinted toward the weapon, his blaster raised. Zia followed close behind, her eyes sharp and focused on the task ahead. Zarek and Dr. Lyra kept the Varkas soldiers at bay, their movements quick and calculated as they provided cover for the two of them. The air seemed to vibrate with the sheer power of the machine, the intensity of the energy growing by the second. As Callum reached the base of the weapon, he saw what they were up against. The machine was a colossal structure of metal, energy conduits, and strange alien technology. It was designed to harness the power of the planet itself, and it pulsed with raw, dangerous energy. Callum could feel the heat radiating from it, the danger that it posed. But this was their only chance. He couldn't hesitate. Zia was at his side, already working to disable the power source. She quickly accessed the control panel, her fingers flying across the buttons as she tried to override the system. It's too complex, she muttered, frustration evident in her voice. I need more time. Callum's heart hammered in his chest. They couldn't afford to waste time. The Varkas soldiers were closing in again, and the weapon was almost fully charged. He grabbed Zia's shoulder, steadying her. You've got this, Zia. We're with you. You can do it. Zia met his gaze, her eyes burning with a fierce determination. She nodded. I won't let them win. With a final, desperate push, Zia hacked into the weapon's core system. There was a brief pause, and then nothing. For a moment, it felt like the world had stopped. And then, with a deafening roar, the machine sparked and exploded, its core tearing apart in a flash of blinding light. The shockwave slammed into Callum and Zia, sending them both sprawling to the ground. The sound of the explosion echoed in their ears, and for a moment, everything was drowned out by the deafening noise. When the dust settled, the weapon was gone, but so was much of the facility. The walls around them were crumbling, and the remaining Varkas soldiers had either been taken down or scattered in retreat. They had done it. They had destroyed the weapon. The air was thick with dust, the remnants of the explosion still lingering in the atmosphere as Callum, Zia, Zarek, and Dr. Lyra surveyed the aftermath of their victory. The Varkas facility was in ruins. What had once been a towering symbol of the enemy's power and ambition was now little more than a broken shell, its walls crumbling and its advanced technology reduced to smoldering debris. But despite the destruction around them, there was a strange sense of peace that settled over the group, as if they had just witnessed the beginning of something new. Callum wiped the sweat from his brow, his body aching from the fight. The battle had taken its toll on everyone, but they had succeeded in destroying the weapon. The Varkas plans had been foiled. For now. Yet, Callum knew this was just one battle in a much larger war. The Varkas were still out there, still a threat to the galaxy. But today, they had struck a blow that would be felt far and wide. Zaya stood beside him, her eyes fixed on the horizon, where the first light of dawn was beginning to break through the dark clouds. She had been through so much, and yet there she was, still standing, still fighting. Callum couldn't help but admire her. She had come so far from the frightened girl he had found all those years ago. Now she was a leader, a symbol of hope for the people who had been oppressed by the Varkas. "We did it," Zaya said quietly, her voice carrying the sense of disbelief. "We actually did it." Callum nodded, his heart swelling with pride. "We did. But it's not over yet. There's still a lot of work to be done." Zia turned to face him, her expression serious. "I know, but we've made a dent, and that's more than I thought possible." "We've made a dent," Callum repeated, "but it's a big one." Dr. Lyra approached them, her face tired but relieved. "The facility is destroyed, and the weapon is gone, but the Varkas will rebuild. They always do." She paused, looking around at the wreckage. "But we'd given them a setback. We've shown them that they're not invincible." Zarek, who had been silent up until now, spoke in his usual gravelly tone. "We've also shown them that we're not afraid. They won't forget this." Zia gave him a small smile. "I don't think they will." The group stood in the silence that followed, the weight of the moment settling over them. The mission had been a success, but Callum knew that it had come at a cost. Lives had been lost. They had faced unimaginable dangers, and yet they had prevailed. But the war was far from over. The Varkas were a force unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen, and if they wanted to win this fight, they would need more than just victories. They would need unity, strategy, and the kind of hope that had brought them all together in the first place. Zia's voice broke the silence again. "What now?" Callum looked at her, meeting her gaze with a mixture of determination and uncertainty. "Now, we rebuild. We take what we've learned here, and we take the fight to them. We find new allies, gather more forces, and we push them back, piece by piece." Zia nodded, the resolve in her eyes hardening once again. "And we don't stop until they're gone." Dr. Lyra smiled softly. "It's going to be a long road, but we'll walk it together." Zarek let out a small chuckle. "And when we reach the end of it, I'll be ready for a vacation." The tension that had hung in the air lightened for a moment, the camaraderie between them clear in the way they interacted. Despite the horrors they had faced, they had formed a bond, one that went beyond mere survival. They had become a family, united by their shared goal and the belief that they could make a difference. As they began to move toward the exit, Callum felt a sense of hope rise within him. The road ahead would be difficult, but they had proven that they were capable of overcoming the impossible. Together, they had shown the galaxy that no matter how dark the night, there was always the promise of a new dawn. And for the first time in a long while, Callum believed that victory was possible, that with people like Zia by his side, there was no enemy they couldn't face. And as they stepped into the light of the new day, Callum knew that the fight was far from over. But with this victory under their belts, they had given the galaxy a reason to hope again. The days following their victory over the Varkas were both a time for healing and a reminder of the long road ahead. Callum, Zia, Zarek, and Dr. Lyra had returned to their ship, the Allegiance, ready to regroup and plan their next move. They had gained the upper hand, but the war was far from over. Each of them knew that it wouldn't be enough to simply destroy one weapon. The Varkas had far more resources, and the weapon they had taken down was just one piece of a much larger puzzle. Inside the ship's command center, Callum stood by the console, looking out at the stars. The vastness of space seemed to stretch endlessly before him, a constant reminder of the challenge that lay ahead. The galaxy was fractured, filled with systems under the Varkas' oppressive grip, and many worlds were still in dire need of help. The work they had started was only a small fraction of what needed to be done. They had no idea how many more weapons the Varkas were building, or how many more planets had been turned into battlefields. Zia entered the command center, her expression as determined as ever. She had changed over the past few days, a newfound strength in her eyes. Though she carried the weight of their mission, she was no longer the girl he had first encountered. Now she was a leader, and she wore that role with a quiet confidence. "We've received word from several systems," she said, her voice firm. "They're ready to join the fight." Callum turned to her, intrigued. "How many?" "At least 5. The word has spread about the Varkas weapon and the victory we achieved. People are starting to believe that we can win." Zia's eyes shone with hope. "We've got support. They're willing to fight." Callum felt a spark of hope ignite in his chest. For the first time in a while, the future didn't seem as bleak. But that hope quickly faded as he remembered the challenges ahead. "That's good, but it's still just a few systems. We need more." "We will get more," Zia insisted. "The message is spreading. But we need to be smart about it. We need to form alliances, build a network of resistance. If we can get the right people, the right planets, on our side, we'll have a real chance to take down the Varkas." Callum nodded. "Then it's time to start making those connections." Zarek, who had been listening quietly from the doorway, spoke up. "We can't afford to waste time. The Varkas will regroup, and they'll be gunning for us. We need to be ready for the next move." Dr. Lyra entered next, her face filled with concern. "We've got intel from the Varkas. They've already started rebuilding the weapon facilities. If we don't act fast, it could be too late to stop them." Callum clenched his fists, frustration bubbling up inside him. It was always the same. Just as they thought they had made progress, the enemy would adapt, grow stronger, and push back. But this time, they couldn't afford to wait. "What do we need to do to stop them?" "We need to hit them hard," Zia said. "We need to strike at the heart of their operations and sabotage their ability to build more weapons. If we do that, we can slow them down, make them think twice about continuing." "We can't do it alone," Callum added. "We need to gather more support, more ships, more fighters. We need to give these people a reason to believe that they can win." Dr. Lyra nodded. "There are hidden resistance groups in several sectors. We've already made contact with some of them. But we need to reach out to others. Make sure they're ready to fight when the time comes." Callum turned back to the view of the stars, the weight of their mission settling heavily on his shoulders. They had made progress, but the war was far from over. The Varkas were still a threat, and they wouldn't stop until they had absolute control. But Callum wasn't willing to let that happen. Not while there was still hope. Not while there were still people who were willing to fight. "We'll do whatever it takes," Callum said, his voice filled with determination. "We're not backing down." Zia placed a hand on his shoulder, her gaze steady and resolute. "Neither are we." The team stood together, each of them knowing that the road ahead would be long and difficult. But they had a new purpose now. They weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting for the freedom of the galaxy. And as they prepared for the battles to come, one thing was certain. They would never stop until the Varkas were defeated. And the storm that was gathering across the stars would be one they would face together. The Allegiance was quiet as the crew prepared for what would be their most crucial mission yet. Callum stood in the ship's command center, staring at the holomap that flickered before him. Across the galaxy, the Resistance had gathered, their numbers swelling with each passing day. More planets, more systems, more people were joining the fight against the Varkas. The network of resistance cells they had built was stronger than ever, but there was still one final task that needed to be done. The Varkas' main stronghold, A massive fortress hidden on a remote moon was where they were building their final weapon, one that could end the war before. Zia stood beside Callum, her eyes narrowing as she studied the map. "This is it," she said softly. "This is where we finish it." Callum nodded, his face hard with resolve. "We've come this far. We can't stop now." Zarek, who had been silently observing, spoke up, his voice rough with emotion. "It's been a long road. Too many lives lost. But we're not going to let them win now." "Not when we're this close," Dr. Lyra added, her voice steady despite the weight of their mission. "If we can take down this fortress, the Varkas will have no choice but to retreat. Their main base of operations will be gone. They'll lose their ability to wage war on the scale they've been." Callum's fingers hovered over the holomap, tracing the outlines of the fortress. It was heavily fortified, surrounded by layers of defenses, and guarded by the Varkas elite forces. But the resistance was ready. They had gathered a fleet of ships, fighters, bombers, and transports, ready to launch an assault. They had the numbers, they had the firepower, and they had the will to win. "We need to take out their defense systems first," Zia said, her voice calm but filled with intensity. "If we don't, they'll shoot down our fleet before we even get close. And we need to be in and out quickly," Dr. Lyra added. "Once we disable the defenses, we'll need to sabotage their power source. Without that, the fortress will be useless." Callum looked around at his team. Each of them had changed over the course of this war. They had been through hell and back, faced impossible odds, and fought for something bigger than themselves. But now, they were ready. They were no longer just a small group of rebels. They were a force to be reckoned with, and they were going to finish this fight. "Everyone knows their roles," Callum said, his voice firm. "We strike hard, strike fast, and we don't give them a chance to regroup. This is our chance to end it, to make sure the galaxy doesn't fall under their control." Zia placed a hand on his shoulder, her eyes locked onto his with unshakable determination. "We're with you, Callum. We've got this." With a deep breath, Callum turned and made his way to the Allegiance's hangar bay. The sound of boots hitting metal echoed as Eric, Dr. Lyra, and Zia followed him. The tension was palpable as the crew prepared for the final assault. The ships were ready, and the resistance fighters were already in position. But even with all the preparation, Callum knew that nothing was guaranteed. They were about to take on the most dangerous mission of their lives. As the fleet launched into space, the stars ahead seemed to stretch on forever. But Callum knew that beyond those stars, the fate of the galaxy was hanging in the balance. The Varkas might have had control for far too long, but it was time for the galaxy to rise up. The time for waiting was over. The time for action was now. "We're almost there," Zia said, her voice crackling over the comms. "Get ready." The final approach was swift. The Varkas fortress loomed ahead like a dark shadow, a monument to the enemy's power. But this time, it wasn't an unstoppable force. This time, it was vulnerable, and they were going to bring it down. The first wave of bombers tore through the enemy's defenses, blasting through shields and striking key power sources. Zia and Zarek led the charge, taking down enemy fighters with precise, lethal movements. Dr. Lyra worked quickly, guiding the crew through the maze of enemy technology, ensuring they stayed one step ahead. As Callum approached the heart of the fortress, his heart pounded in his chest. This was it, the final push. The enemy was crumbling, but they still had to get to the core. The Varkas were retreating, but Callum knew they wouldn't stop fighting until the very end. When the fortress finally collapsed, the shockwave rippled across the moon's surface. The Varkas were defeated, and as the dust settled, the galaxy's first true victory over the enemy had been achieved. Callum stood in the silence that followed, his crew beside him. The war was far from over, but they had won a victory that would change everything. And for the first time in years, Callum allowed himself to believe that peace was within reach. The storm had passed. The dawn was here. and the galaxy would rise once more.